ERC-725 is something I proposed actually over a year ago now. And since then, people talked about it, people discussed, an alliance formed, and people thinking of how identity using or not using blockchain and digital identity can be and should be. So I think so far the biggest achievement of what this standard did is it made everybody talk. It made everybody actually debate it for real, and the reason is because it's something concrete. Like it's something concrete which might make sense or might make not sense, but at least it's something you can talk about, and you have some basis on what you can talk and criticize or not. And I think this is so far like the biggest achievement of what the standard did. It's in no way final, and it's in no way meant to solve the world's problems. But it's a start, and it initiated something, which UPort should have initiated, in my opinion, but they did not. So I did. But this is just the start, right? This is just the start of a debate. I can run through these slides, and it's basically just really bare bone what is identity. But I actually would like to probably, even with the questions later, have a little bit of a debate around this topic, because it's interesting, surprisingly, that if you propose something at a certain point in time, right, and you hit a nerve, you hit like the nerve of time or something like this, the zeitgeist, then things stick, and things, people talk about things, and if it comes at the right time, that's then when people start talking about things. And that's what happened with ERC-20. That happened now with ERC-725 as well, and some other standards. Interesting enough, in our space is people are not that critical in the sense of like really looking at, hey, does it make sense in the first place at all? Like at first, everybody goes with the wave and say, oh yeah, there's something, let's use it, let's implement it, let's try it out. And it takes rather, even though this is a very fast-moving space, it takes rather a lot of time for people to come to the point of realizing, okay, was this a good direction or not? And that's fascinating. Also very surprising, I have to say. So yeah, let me quickly go through what identity is. And I'm in no way an expert of identity. I just came up with something which actually I later figured out a lot of other people came up with too, because everybody kind of came up with the same rough structure. Anybody knows my background? Not? Should I say something about this? Okay, 2 people. Oh, 3 people. Okay. Yeah, then I have a slide for that. Yeah, so I did these things, and some of them had a lot of impact in the early days in Ethereum, especially the Mist browser and Ethereum wallet. Some had later an impact, and that's what people still use today big time. Is like ERC-20 is a proposal I made in November 2015, and a few other things. Yeah. So yeah, let's quickly go through what identity is. So identity is kind of how I see it, and how I put this here together is, it's basically properties about ourselves. How we look like. Basically, biometric properties could be a part of your identity. Also, where you live. Any kind of things which make you more relatable, give context around you. And actually identity, and that's also very important, it's not only for people. Identity is also for things, and also for companies, and for anything which is needs to be somehow identified. But identity is also history. Like where do I come from? From what village I came from. What my family's background is, if I'm a royal, blah, blah, blah. It goes all the way back to centuries, what country I'm from, you know, what football team I believe in. These are all things which kind of create identity over time and create a context around me as a person or even a company and so on. Do I really have to point that? And how we see identity today, or how we implemented identity, let's say, is most of the time in plastic cards. We just added everything in a plastic card, and that's what identity is for a government. But the interesting thing is, what are these plastic cards? You know, these plastic cards are nothing else than somebody went one day, you know, to a bureaucracy office, you know, to an agency, for example, Germany. He showed up with his picture and his birth certificate. Yeah, he looked the same like on the picture, and then the person said, yeah, well, that's the birth certificate, it looks real, you look real too, and that's your face. And you know, they combine this into this claim holder, you could even call it, you know, which we call a passport. So the passport is nothing else than a combination of all of these different claims. And because if you look at a passport, and it's so hard to create one yourself, you know, we believe, okay, this guy showed up in an office one day, you know, and interacted with a trustable person who put his then, you know, give his stamp and say, yes, you can have a passport. So we combine these claims, and what it basically is it's claims, right? And our whole world and interacting with identity is nothing else than a combination of all of those things. So we combine a lot of claims in a complex form together, and basically that's how almost all our reputation works. You know, you have university certificates, you have a driver's license, even the university itself has a certificate that it can be a university, so that it's already getting a claim from somebody, then giving a claim to a pupil or to a you know, even to professors and whatnot. So it's like, you know, this huge mixture of claims from different entities, and they're basically just saying, yeah, you look, I checked that, it looks good. So, it's all claims. So it's all claims, really. And that is kind of what was my little revelation, that everything is basically just a bunch of claims. Yeah, I would say that's more wording. I mean, I initially called it actually properties, and then the W3C called it claims, and then I called it claims too. After I wrote this, I just changed the word. Interesting enough, now they changed it to something else, the credentials. Yeah. So on the end, it's the same thing, right? I just call it claims, so yeah. Okay, if you want to make the difference, then yes, you could see this as a difference. Yeah, in this case, I mean claims which, yeah, I mean in itself they are claims, you know, how they are or what they become if you agree to them. Yeah, it's probably an attestation, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's an approved claim. It's all claims. It's all claims. Yeah, let's not get too philosophical here. Yeah, but like the current infrastructure is this, you know, and this is like obviously we have no digital identity yet, even though many states could have already issued, you know, the perfect, super everywhere usable digital identity, and we barely have that. I mean, first off, it takes a long time to convince, you know, governments and stuff to do these things. At the same time, you have maybe a passport who can digitally sign. I mean, some passports or some ID cards can do that, but it's barely used anywhere, right? But yeah, infrastructure looks like this. Big, you know, institution holding all the data for you. You're the little guy. So the solution is to decentralize it all. That would be the way forward. And that's kind of what also, I would say, re-initiated the debate about digital identity. Because we now have this technology called blockchain, where we have trusted entry points, where we can create trusted links, and we can basically have things to look up. And suddenly a part of this, it was the identity, or what made the digital identity so difficult, was solved. There's always a delay here, or it's not working at all. There's a delay. Yeah. So this is basically just really showing of why standardization makes sense, right? Why do we want to standardize things? I mean, back then in the day, we had Bitcoin was like the first, and then people hack on top, Mastercoin and Counterparty, and this was kind of like the first colored coins. The time of the colored coins, I think it was 2014, 2013. The first token which I'm aware of on Ethereum was DigX. They basically, I mean, it was the first one actually where they also collected money then later on. They did this before there was ERC-20, which made them later change their token as well, obviously. And a lot of these things, basically, they started to really create an impact and synergies, which we didn't have before. Is basically when we had a standard, which was rather a very simple interface, and it created a bunch of tokens, which we have now. And now we have something like here, Token Engineering Summit and stuff, because everybody now can be super creative about, creating tokens. And this is only because everybody agreed to the same little basic, terms, which in this case is just 5-6 functions or something. And standardization is, I think, really the most important aspect of this new world computer, Ethereum, and in general smart contracts, is that we are now defining of how these little programs we can install on this computer, how do they interact, and what modules do we have, and what are good basic core modules which everybody should use, so then we can interact in a more automated fashion. And the token is one of these modules, and we agreed to how you check the balance and how you transfer token, and that created already a crazy billion-dollar industry, and events like these here and a lot of others. But really the core is it's the standardization, it's agreement on how do we interact. I think we need the same with identity. We obviously need the same with identity, and there's two different routes right now. There's the privacy-focused identity, and then there's the public identity. The public identity is something you build up where you gain reputation. For example, for a company, the public identity is the important identity, because that's what others can use to verify whatever you did or whatever's your track record, and that's what also others need to know in order to see if something comes from a certain entity or not. Is it approved from the entity or not. So public identities on the one hand, and the private identity, the one where you have even maybe many identities, where you reveal your things on a demand basis. That's kind of like the other side. The standard I came up with is the first. The public identity. So it's basically something you, as an entity or as a person or even as a thing, you can create to be interactable, be reachable, and be knowable. And this on the end can create reputation, right, over time. So ERC-725 is a rather simple idea of creating a smart contract that represents a person, a company, or a thing. And this is very slow here, so good. So right now it consists of actually two standards. It's ERC-725 and ERC-735. It consists of three components, so to say. The keys and execution is right now in the 725, and the claims is in 735. And I would also like to actually really more like talk about what is the current state of things and what's the current thinking, and which I do agree with, because that is kind of what I came up with as basic components. And I think we have to actually move forward to even more modularize these. For example, 725 itself fulfills two purposes. It's like one, your proxy contract where you execute and interact with other smart contracts, and on the other hand, it has some form of key management. The key management is done on purposely simple in a way that you can even say there's one key controlling my identity, and n out of like a 1 out of 1 keys can do whatever they want. But I added also like this approval scheme that, for example, you can say 2 out of 3 have to approve something, or 2 out of 5 have to approve something, and there is even different key types for the reason to basically, you know, propose security by default, right? So because as I might experience, if you propose something, most of the time people just take it, you know, especially if you propose it at the right time, in the right zeitgeist, let's say. So now the thinking is, okay, should we break this actually more off into different modules? And the interesting thing is, for example, the proxy, that's something which actually initially Jeffrey Wilke, you know, the founder of Go Ethereum, like we discussed this, I think, yeah, almost 4 years ago in Amsterdam, when we were thinking about like, hey, how should we reveal addresses and keys in the Mist browser at all? And the idea was, okay, let's not reveal addresses at all. Let's only create proxy smart contracts, which then gets revealed, because there you can later, you know, exchange the keys, and it's not such a big deal if you lose any of those keys. That kind of, you know, is like a little bit what came out here in some form. But basically, just to run through simple what ERC-725 is, wrong direction, so. So, so basically it's a key management system, and these keys in 725 as it is right now, there is like different type of keys proposed. There's a management key, which has the ability to remove and add other keys. And then there's an action key, which is the key you actually would normally use to, for example, execute through your identity, who use the proxy or use your identity. This is also something you could like sign documents, assign a login request, and other things. And then there is a key you use for signing claims. Well, if you issue claims to somebody else, that's what you basically would sign it with. And I also structured it in a way based on the feedback early that it not only supports Ethereum addresses, but it also supports different type of keys. Basically, ideally, it should support all kind of keys. And as Ethereum is, you know, a blockchain, and you cannot store probably an RSA key on there because it would get very expensive, you would only store the hashes of the keys. This way, if somebody basically signs you a message and says, here, look, I signed it with this, you know, recover the address, that's the key, you simply can hash the key and check, yeah, it's in this smart contract, so it probably belongs here, or belongs to this identity. So basically, this key is able to control this identity, and therefore it might be just this identity as well. The other part is the execution. That's the proxy part, and that's very simple. You basically are able to, you know, act through your identity on other smart contracts, and that's for certain things very interesting. I mean, for example, you could imagine having a claim that you are a verified or accredited investor, and you can simply participate in an ICO acting through your smart contract. And the ICO smart contract can verify, yes, okay, he's checked, that he has a trusted claim issuer who says that he's good to go. let's just let them in, and the others we reject. There's some, obviously, there's some privacy issues involved here, but we are at the same level of privacy than we are with Bitcoin in general, right? So everybody is transacting pretty public all the time. But things like this would be possible if you're thinking about a use case on-chain. And the claims part is basically that you are able to attach claims to this smart contract, to this identity as well, which says, so the claims have a certain structure, and the structure basically allows that there can be different claim types. There's a schema. The schema would say of how you would check and verify such a claim, and these are all substandards which would need to be defined. For example, it could be simply a signature, and the actual data could be sitting on IPFS, and it could be a simple IPFS hash, which is referenced plus the signature of the claim issuer. But it could also be a smart contract where the data is the call data of how you ask the smart contract to verify something. So there are different ways of how these claims could look like, and it could also be done by people who not necessarily have an on-chain identity or even are able to act on the blockchain, because they can simply sign a message and you can just attach it to your identity as well, and it's verified by others that it was signed by a certain party. I would assume governments take a while before they publish their blockchain identity, for example. So claims can be anything. There's obviously a lot of room for standardization of different claim types or topics. There's obviously room for the ways of how you verify these claims. So there are also other proposals, and one is coming from OED, one of the guys from Uport, of a claim registry that will solve a few problems, because the advantage of a registry is that you can set the rules very concretely, and the rule can say, I can issue a claim about somebody. We could even say that I have to approve that a claim, but the one who issued the claim is always able to remove it. This is also here in this standard, with the difference if it sits in your smart contract, you might just not implement that, right? So somebody issues you a claim, but then you can't, or he cannot remove the claim again because I just didn't build in the function, or the function doesn't work as he expects. So that's definitely the advantage of a registry. The disadvantage of a registry is that it's rather unflexible. So once deployed and once largely used, that's the only functionality it can do. While your own smart contract, especially if you have upgradable parts for the claim, you could always add different ways of how things are done, different new verification methods, different new ways of how claims are added or even dropped after time and so on. Yeah, so that's, for example, the structure of a claim. Claim topic, it's actually called now, schema, and issuer signature data and the URI. So this is a little off-chain and on-chain use case of how you could interact with this. I would just quickly go through this. So basically, if I'm off-chain, I would simply, and for example, I want to go into, let's say, a party, VIP access event. I would simply get a random string or something which only this guy, at the door knows. He sends it to me. I would sign the string. I will also point to and sign my identity, or just point to my identity. And then he can go to this identity, get whatever claim he requires, or he would basically look by claim topic and issuer, because he obviously will only trust some issuer he knows. So he knows the issuer beforehand and he knows the topic. He would look, if you have a claim from that, then he would go and check the claim. So he would verify that the signature is correct. He probably would like to check if the claim signer key is still at the issuer's address. And then you're basically good to go. And you can go right in here to the party. On-chain, that's the beauty of why having an identity on-chain, is you can do all of these processes automatically. on chain. For example, if you want to call a certain function at a smart contract where you say, okay, I want to, you know, let's say it's an ICO smart contract, I want to send money. The smart contract could check, okay, are you an identity, get the claim, whatever claim you expect should be there, or whatever the claim the smart contract expects to be there. He would then check the signature, would check if the key is still at the issuer's identity, and then you're good to go. Yeah, wrong button. Yeah, so then you're basically in. That also could obviously be done with 780 as well. 780 is the registry claim registry contract. There needs to be a lot of other things standardized of how these claims look like and how you interact with them. But yeah, the claims itself can be done in many ways on chain, as long as you have a proxy, you know, one which represents the person on chain. So yeah, this is the process here again, and yeah, this is kind of like how it's currently structured. ERC-725 is the proxy plus the key management, and ERC-725 is added to that as claim holder. In the initial idea, it's all in one smart contract. That could also be, you know, dispersed into separate smart contracts. You know, one could be just a proxy. One could be a, for example, in your ERC-725 identity, everything can be managed by one key, and this key is another smart contract, and this smart contract then has whatever custom logic of managing your identity, right? So this can be nicely scaffolded. There's an ERC-725 alliance, which is formed by a few startups who basically said, hey, we want to, you know, look into the standard. We want to incorporate this in our protocol because we need a universal login and we need a unique, you know, transferable identity. That's kind of like ERC-725 now became the synonym for digital identity on chain. This alliance is based on that name. I would assume that in the future it probably moves away from that specific standard, and it's more like a collection of dealing with different types and morphing these standards. Origin protocol also made a little interface where you can issue claims against each other and create identities and so on, and they have now also incorporated that in their mainnet marketplace application, as far as I know. There's another, that's an interesting one here, because what I did is I did a very simple mechanism where your ID card, you know, there are ID cards who can digitally sign, can basically sign your, sign a claim on your blockchain identity, and therefore you connect your government issued identity with your blockchain identity, because that ID card can simply sign, yes, you know, I know this is the right address, and it was signed by the passport and by the owner of the identity. So basically this is what was initially done, and since there's a discussion and there's the alliance and there's a lot of debate happening. By the way, how much time do I have?
You have 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, what I would just quickly say is that what I would like to see is that, because we are kind of moving into this, you know, I would call it the ERC wars, you know, where everybody wants to create another standard, and if I don't like that little piece in this standard, I just create another, you know, the next standard, and everybody tries to catch the best number. By the way, the ERC-20 was issue number 20, and I didn't create any issue before to get to that number. It was really just the number 20. That set the precedent, and now it's now it's, you know, the numbers. I have to say, for the 725, I do created an empty issue because 725 just looked better. Yeah. So, but what I would like to see is that actually we are contributing on improving the standards, or changing, and even if it means changing 80%, to make them right. Because all of this is just a draft, you know, it's proposed as a draft to be debated. It's currently in the ERP repository as a draft, so you can make a pull request onto the document. In there can discussions happening on that specific change, if that change makes sense or not. And I think this is how it should evolve, rather than everybody just creating a new number and having then their face in the corner of GitHub, which gives you history engravement or so. I think that's not so necessary, because on the end it counts what is used and useful, and not like who now propose whatever standard. So there's now discussion here right now there's I think around 3 or 4 identity related standards. So there's 725 and 735. There is the 780 as a claim registry. There's a simpler identity also proposed by OED, which is basically 725, just leaner. Alex van der Sande proposed a universal login, which basically means you can you have a proxy identity which you simply can interact with by signing messages, and somebody can relay them for you to the network and pay the gas for you. In my opinion, they are all different components of the same thing, and what we should figure out is what is the best structure we can have. How can we take the best pieces of each and combine them to a good global standard. And for an on-chain identity in this case, obviously, which also nicely integrates with off-chain identities, because your off-chain identity can correlate or can actually reference your on-chain identity if you wish so, and the other way around, if that's interesting. So yeah, what I would like to see is more actually thinking about modularization. I think that's what we have to do. We have to break these things into more smaller modules, and which only do then certain aspects. For example, 725 is already actually 2 things, right? It's the key management plus the execution part. The good thing is that these different pieces can then be reused in other aspects as well, like just the proxy can be reused in a non-identity context. Key management, obviously, is basically just a multi-sig wallet, can be used in a different context if it's done right. Yeah, and I think we should come more together and discuss on getting the right things. And if that means that certain standards get merged or certain standards gets dropped, or it's like done under one umbrella or the other umbrella or whatever, that's the way how a standard should evolve. And I think that's about to happen. It just takes a long time, which is fascinating, right?
Thanks, Fabian. Yeah, let's do. I do want to open the floor for some questions. I see we already have one.
Hi, I will put my hand up. I sat on the ISO committee before, and I've seen bullshit. It's really fast, number one. The thing I was about to ask you was hierarchies, both for key management and for identities. Have you thought about that?
Hierarchy for key management and
for identities.
So what is above, or what?
You can have abstraction layers on top of that, and then you can decompose them.
Yeah.
If you want. So if you think about it at the start rather than later, it's much more easier.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of starting simple. I think one of the keys why ERC-725 took off, because it's plain really simple. It's basically 2 functions if you really want so. And I think also one very important aspect of a good specification is describe it concise, describe it very simple, and it has to be simple by design. One big learning always: people don't read. Very important. People don't read. So the shorter your text, the better, because people don't read. It's like a very natural thing. Long text, skip. So yeah, I would say I could have started even simpler, right? Really simply, it's just a proxy. What I felt was necessary at the time was to show the bigger picture of what are the components which we need to combine to create something we can call identity, and that was the proposal. it was not meant to be the final proposal. It was actually meant to be dissected, you know, and I think that's what's happening now. But it made everybody see the picture and see, oh, there's something concrete, you know, well, let's use that, you know, or not, or this, you know, or debate it or whatever, or criticize it. But at least, you know, it got the whole thing going. So, because now the discussion is more about exactly what we want to improve, what piece we want to improve, where we put what and how does it look like in a, you know, public discussion, rather than, you know, still like philosophically talking about like digital identity might be a thing, you know, when we are old or something like this, yeah? So I think it made things concrete, and that was the point.
Thank you for the call from the contribution. I wanted to ask you, well, also as Tannenbaum once said, it's a great thing about a standard that you have many to choose from. And I wanted to ask you if, is there any early adopter project working on this? I get to know one who does some on-chain and off-chain things, are proof of physical address, proof of bank account, and notary license. The project is called POA Network, and I understand that they are working on integrating with this, even if it is draft. So any other projects or any other ways of contributing to?
My ERC-725 Alliance slide was probably really bad, because I should have shown the companies, you know, in it rather than the top picture. It's already a few, and I mean, you know, saying you join an alliance doesn't mean you will do anything with it. That's, you know, it's always a difference of, you know, saying you're behind something and doing it. But there are, I mean, Origin Protocol, for example, has already integrated it right now as it is. It probably has to change over time. There's a few projects, POA Network, yeah, for example. But on the end, what the most will do is they will support multiple standards, you know, because you never know which one will succeed. Some do want to be in the discussion, involved, you know, in changing and altering the standards. Others just basically want to take what will be adopted, and they don't even care what. It's tricky, because with the standard situation is you can never really know when it is final. Because a standard, you know, you can say it's final, doesn't mean nothing. You know, a standard, in my opinion, is only then successful if it's widely adopted, and then after we can move it from draft to final. Like ERC-20, which we moved to final in September 2017. And it was like 2 years later, after it was basically already pretty much used, you know, after the ICO bubble and stuff like this. So I think that I mean, we have to see what works. And also the point is that when people start using it, they will see what doesn't. You know, what are the problems? Is this maybe, I mean, right now I made it kind of like a, you know, integrate everything and show that it can be multiple different type of keys and blah, 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 blah. We probably, for something really good usable now, we will have to boil it down again and say, hey, yeah, let's drop the custom keys. Let's only go with like Ethereum addresses for now. You know, let's modularize it, that we can even exchange these different key managers over time, so we're not really bound of like one specific way of how it can be done. You know, discuss the flows of how you interact with the different pieces, and I think that's what is now, what should happen now, and that's the next step.
We have time for one short question.
Yeah, thank you. So I really enjoy it. I follow the Alliance pretty closely. I totally agree that, you know, like the grassroots and sort of like getting people to contribute and build this towards a standard is really positive. But there's also like a heap of enterprise level and government level groups that are going, oh, blockchain, super good use case is identity, right? And so how do we try to build out the standard in a way where it's grassroots and, you know, we're the ones building it, but at the same time we can go to, you know, these large corporates or institutions and say, hi, this is actually the standard we're using?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I would say, you know, if the standard itself is very concise and unopinionated, that it allows all kind of different attachments, be it more private or be it more public, it can work, you know. And I mean, as a space itself, there will be never the 100%, you know, saying that this is it. I mean, even ERC-20 was the first trial, and now we have to move on to the next, use 777 or whatever. So yeah, it's tricky to say. I mean, I would say none of these standards is final yet. So, help build them, or play around and see how you can integrate them. But obviously, if everybody does their own thing, then we get nowhere. So, thank you.